Let's continue with the two last theory on elderly abuse. And this model of social organization, they focus on the exosystem and macrosystem. And we've been through this before when we talk about the ecological theory. When you see on this page, the exosystem refers to the elderly person's neighborhood, community, and the macro system consists of the ideologies, value, culture, norms, belief system that affects the neighborhood, which trickle down to the family and the individual. So, as you can see, this ecological theory has 4 layers. Microsystem, which consists of the older adults and the caretakers. And sometimes the caretakers can also be the perpetrators. And the mesosystem consists of family, friends, and neighbors. So this ecological theory focuses on one system stacking upon one another. But these models of social organization only focus on the last two systems. How neighborhoods, communities in which the older adult live interacts with the ideologies, value, culture, norms of that community to affect the well-being of the elderly. So this model of social organization focus on how the community neighborhood in which the older person lives is always influenced by the norms, the values, even the social control system. People in that neighborhood or community don't always have 100% freedom to behave the way they want, to act the way they want. And it assumes that this community or neighborhood can be diverse, and usually the subgroup or the subculture within those communities will always go along with whatever that has been decided by the majorities, especially when it comes to unacceptable behaviors like illicit or illegal activities, murder, violent crimes, theft, among other things. So this is the gist of the models of social organization. Even though there are diversity across different groups in terms of age, ethnicity, other psychological characteristics, personality traits, attitudes towards different things. But in general, like what we see in most communities around the world in general, if nothing drastic happens, people tend to go along with what's been decided by usually the majority. And this model of social organization is different from the ecological theory. It focuses on how people interact and network with one another. The ecological theory just says that the microsystem is beneath the mesosystem. Mesosystem is beneath the exosystem and the macrosystem. It just focuses on systems stacking up upon one another. It did not really say how people interact across different systems. But this model of social organization focus on how networks of people are being formed. To promote their psychological health, spiritual, social, and other kinds of well-being. And it focused on two major networks, the informal networks, where associations among people in the neighborhood are more voluntary. It focused on relationships among friends and neighbors in that community. The daily conversations, maybe daily text messages, email exchanges, other types of mutual exchanges that takes place in that neighborhood. And there's also formal networks in those communities. Formal networks are obligations, reciprocal relationships. When somebody does something nice to you, you are expected to return the favor. These are all examples of formal relationships. And because of these formal networks, even though we know whether it is informal or formal, networks are something abstract. We cannot really visualize networks. We can visualize networks by observing how people talk to one another, who they often interact with. And we can only observe network on social media platforms, who they often interact with, who they often comment, whose posts they often like. But we cannot fully visualize or picture networks holistically. Just my 2 cents. And because of the existence of these two networks, there's something they call community capacity. People gain or build a sense of shared responsibilities because of all these norms, values, culture, traditions, common practices that govern the behaviors of people at the exosystem. As we've been through this, things at the macrosystem like social norms, social control, value, culture, belief dictates how family system, neighborhoods, communities in the exosystem should function. And because of that, both formal and informal networks are influenced by the macro system, the value, norms, culture, traditions, among other things. This is what we mean by the models of social organization. Any question? Okay, The last theory that can be used to explain elderly abuse is the feminist theory. It seems to me that all these theory we discussed since last week, they are either gender neutral or all this theory, they don't focus on the power imbalances among different groups of people. Different age groups have different power bases in any society, regardless of their economic and political system. And different members of the family are on different power bases. Depends on who is the breadwinner. Common sense tells us. And different gender groups or different sexes are not on equal power basis. We know that. And income, wealth, asset ownership, educational attainment can also determine how much power a person has in a given society. It seems that all these theories assumes that people are on equal power basis and men and women are alike, which is not quite true. We all know that. And because of that, the feminist theories came about to explain elderly abuse. And the feminist theory focus on the concept of intersectionality. Have you heard of that word? Intersectionality is on this page. Have you heard of that word? It means that different dimensions of inequality, age, gender, income, education, residence, wealth, among other things, intersect and interacts with one another to affect a person's health outcomes, educational attainment, well-being in life. It takes into account dominance of one spouse or partner over another. See, people are never on equal power basis. If a woman from a certain racial group happens to be a single mom, we see that 3 dimensions of inequality are intersecting in here. The person's sex, being a woman, being a single mom, the marital status, a second dimension, and maybe income. And she and her family live in a certain neighborhood, high crime, polluted air, bad quality water. The 4th dimension comes into place. This is going to determine her health outcome, her other aspects of her well-being in years to come. So the point is, we cannot just focus on one dimension of inequality. People of a certain racial ethnic group, they may live in certain neighborhoods, whether good or bad. 2 dimensions of inequality already intersect in here. And he or she happens to be of a certain income level, a 3rd dimension comes in. And because of that, people are never the same. They go through the process of aging differently. They are never on equal power basis. This is how the feminist theories came about. And maybe when parents were in their 30s, kids were young. parents had more control over the kids. They try to discipline the kids by exercising social control for good reasons. And kids have to listen to the parents in many cultures because parents put the roof on top of their head. Parents pay the bill. Parents put bread on the table. But the roles may reverse, we know. After a certain age, when parents enter into their old age, after retirement, kids are the one who is making the money, who is helping out the parents, help to clean the house, help to cook food for the parents, especially if the parents have Alzheimer's or dementia. They don't remember anything. Maybe help the parents to shower, to take a bath, among other things. This is what we mean by reversal of child-parent roles. And when there's a reversal of roles, the power basis may also reverse. Common sense tells us, right? And because of that, if kids, if they are not so nice and they are not so grateful for what parents did to them, they may abuse their parents. If parents, they reach a certain age, they have memory decline. Kids manage their money. They don't even realize that the money is declining in their accounts. So, reversal of roles can also lead to reversals of intergenerational power bases. So, the feminist theory focuses on how, as you can see from here, different dimensions of inequality interacts and intersects with one another to affect a person's outcomes and well-being, age, race, class, gender, among other things. And according to the feminist theory, even to this day, in many parts of the world, women are still homemakers, nurturers. When they gave up on their careers, even if they went back later on, it's harder for women to go back compared to men. Gender and sexuality is not my research focus, but many researchers in that area have found that it's harder for women to go back than a man after years staying home or years after taking a break from their jobs. Or some women, they never work. They had arranged marriage. They live under the father's roof. Then they listen or submit to their husbands after they got married, arranged by the parents. And when the husband deceased, their older kids, usually sons, take over the father's responsibility. They submit to their sons. So, feminist theories, they realize that men and women are not on equal power basis. And because women tend to be more financially dependent on men, still in many cultures, many countries, when somebody is financially dependent on their spouse, they tend to also be emotionally dependent on their spouse. If the spouse mood changes, it affects them. You don't need to take a course in sociology to figure that out. They may also be socially dependent on their spouse. And this can increase a woman's risk for abuse. This is how proponents of feminist theories see things, from a different angle than the previous theories we learned in class. Can you see that? Because the power dynamics are never the same across age group, racial groups, gender groups, different social classes of people, different income groups. And all these dimensions of inequality interacts and intersects with one another to affect the power dynamics. And because of that, even in America and in other countries, women are more prone to abuse. Because they lack educational skills, income, they lack status, if they are dependent on their husbands, and sometimes because of that, they lack social support. In extreme cases, it also happens in the US, especially in the southern states, like Mississippi, Alabama. Sometimes husband controls the lady's bank account. Husband controls the lady's car keys. And because of that, it's almost impossible for the lady even to go to a shelter for abusive women. She has no key. She has no access to her income, to their joint accounts, so to speak, that exist in illusion. It affects her social support system. This is how the feminist theory see things. Are we clear? And sometimes relationship history and abuse trajectories can change over time. I'm going to show you an example after this. Okay, maybe, yeah, I'm going to say it now. I will show you the news later. Maybe the mother-in-law, when she was in her 40s or 50s, she was still quite strong. She abused the daughter-in-law. And when she, the mother-in-law, is in her 70s or 80s, she becomes frail and weak. It's the reverse. Now, the daughter-in-law may take revenge when she is more and more dependent on her daughter-in-law for her basic needs, among other things, or even financial needs. So this is what we mean by relationship history can also change the nature of the abuse trajectories. And because of that, according to feminists, women are marginalized in different domains of inequality. Because of that, they are more likely to be victims of abuse. And sometimes, if they are financially dependent on their husbands, their spouse, they are less inclined to report abuse. So this is how feminists see things. Any questions?